Well, I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to be here with you today. This is Chris Saballera, and we are going inside EMS. Kelly Grayson is on special assignment, and I got to tell you, I am so excited because this episode of Inside EMS is being brought to you by ZOLL Data Systems. Learn how ZOLL software can help improve clinical, operational, financial performance for your organization at zolldata.com. That's ZOLL data.com. I am so very excited to bring to you. I mean, when we think about EMS, let's set it up. When we think about EMS, and we continue to face challenges on multiple fronts. We think about staffing shortages. We think about operational costs arising. We think about reporting standards and the increasing complexity of that. During this podcast, we will discuss why a robust ePCR data and analysis can be the antidote for all of these headaches. And when we think about this from an EMS leadership standpoint, we are constantly trying to find ways to find the best tools that are going to help us to do our job. And today we have some great guests that are going to be joining us from ZOLL Data Systems, Jason Bartholomai and Chuck McSweeney. Jason, Chuck, I want to thank you for joining us on the Inside EMS podcast today.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you here. And you know, Chuck, let me hit you with this question first. I mean, the big thing in EMS right now as we start to think about the challenges is certainly recruiting and retention, right? So if we think about staffing shortages, how do we do more in a quality way with fewer personal resources?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think every agency, when I travel the country, doing consulting as a business clinical consultant with ZOLL, one of the things the number one thing is always staffing and staff, available resources of staff. So some of the things that we need to do is take a look at how do we do things better with less resources. And I think everybody has always said that, how do we do more with less? Some of the things that we need to really take a look at is how do we help the EMT, the paramedic, especially if you're on that busy ambulance or you're covering, call out and now you're working 18 hours instead of just 12 hours. How can we make the getting the information, getting to the scene quicker? How do we make sure the ePCR, which is, probably everybody's complaint, the worst part of the job, but how can we make it better and so they can do it more efficient and faster so they're taking less time to do that and then they're focusing more time on mental health or eating something so they're ready for the next call, and then also maybe ready for the next shift and recharging themselves and not draining themselves with this monotony of drop down boxes, and NEMSIS and everything else, and clinical parameters and clinical practice guidelines and all these other things that we do. If we can bring all those pieces together, make their job easier, it increases their satisfaction too, I believe.
And it's one of the things that you think about. Things aren't over till the paperwork is done, right? So this is a core component. This is how we get paid. Jason, I don't know if you want to answer that or not.
Yeah, I mean, as it pertains to the PCR and the final piece of the puzzle, right? Everybody that's our nemesis in EMS. We just want to treat patients, but in order to pay the bills, we have to have the bottom line, the PCR done. And in my world, I think that as streamlined as we can make it and as easy as we can make it for those crews is absolutely paramount, because they're going to start developing muscle memory around what they're doing every time. So we don't want to make drastic changes, but we do want to make changes towards a positive future and a positive experience in using the software and using the tools that are in front of us. So it's the little things that matter. I say this all the time. It's the little things that matter. And as we work through the platform and we work through whatever problem we're trying to solve with it, we have to take the little pieces into consideration, because at the end of the day, when you're doing charts over 365 days in a year, those little pieces add up to be big pieces.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said I think was really interesting, where you talked about muscle memory, was the fact that as soon as you know where everything is, you are able to get through this chart as quick as you can. And I've been a user of the ZOLL ePCR before, and let me tell you, you guys do make it easy. So, Jason, let me ask you this now. When we think about difficulties in finding and hiring qualified dispatchers and clinicians and billers, I mean, this is a big challenge as well. So it's not just what's happening in the field with the people who are delivering the care, but this is a whole encompass team. And sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, from the field side, we forget that the dispatchers are integral. We forget that the billers are integral into this, right?
Yep.
I mean, so how do we deal with that?
Yeah, and I think the important part is building from the ground up, the foundation of what we do. You know, from a ZOLL perspective, we have billing software, we have PCR software, and we have dispatch software. So if you're using the trifecta, if you're using all three pieces, building from the ground up, education and training has to involve all three branches because you have to have the understanding from a dispatch perspective as to what the crew does, and from a crew perspective, what dispatch and billing does, and from a billing perspective, what dispatch and crews do. So you have to kind of complete that picture. You have to give them an idea of what each independent arm is doing as the ground up training process goes. Everybody has to be familiar. And being familiar allows those people, those dispatchers, those crew members, and those billers to, you know, develop that critical thinking ability around each of the pieces
Yeah.
so that as they're working through their chart, they're developing that muscle memory, they're doing their chart, they have that ability to think critically and make sure all the pieces and the components are in the chart necessary for the billing process or the QA process, right? Because you have to look at the chart holistically. It has to be encompassing of billing. It has to be encompassing of clinical satisfactory data pieces, and it has to be encompassing of legal satisfactory data pieces. So building everything together and looking at it holistically from each of those branches is really important.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point. And Chuck, there's always seems to be this, you know, this tug of war between the field and dispatch, right? I mean, but when we're on the same tool, I think what that does is it gives us the, you know, you have your ePCR, you have the dispatch, program as well. We're all kind of working together. It's got to help ease that animosity a little bit sometimes. Something's got to do it.
Yeah, very much so. And one of the things I do, I call it the ZOLL ecosystem. There's other applications that are in the ecosystem, meaning we're all together. So when you are using the CAD program and then you're using the Respond applications, which is, the EMTs and paramedics using the field, and then you have our ePCR, and then you have ZOLL billing. You also have the EKG monitor import, which is bringing in over all the vital signs and the EKG tracings that's going to help the paramedic speed up their chart, the critical care crew, finish the chart a little bit easier. But when you think of that whole ecosystem, it's great because when you change one thing, that change is connected all the way through the whole ecosystem. So, one of the things we're always doing is listening to our customers, getting feedback from our customers. Our EMS Charts Now platform, which is an intuitive program that is supposed to be, open up on your phone or your Android. You know how to do it. You don't get a user manual with your iPhone or your Android when you get it. So, using these applications that are intuitive and know the native language of the devices really helps the crew member, whether it's the dispatcher, the crew member in the field, or the biller. The worst thing in the billing department is like they don't get signatures, and if they don't have signatures, you can't bill. Especially a Medicare patient. So, bringing these pieces together, making it more intuitive inside the ecosystem and easy to use, the compliance gets so much better. We've seen case studies where we brought people onto our platform where they weren't meeting their objectives or their quotas. We got them onto the platform, and within a matter of a few months, poof, we got them running, and their data is now flowing. The compliance is better. Their higher returns on their money. So everybody's happy. But again, it goes back to investing on each one of those little departments. You can't focus on just the ePCR in the field because you still have those dispatchers taking those calls, trying to get those runs covered.
Right. Yeah.
And you also have the billing department under the financial restraints that, hey, we need money to run the business. So, you got to pay attention to each one of those columns, each one of those little, silos, but they all really come together jointly when it comes to like education and compliance training and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think also investing in the employees, people think about investing in employees. They always think, oh, they need a raise. But investing in employees is not necessarily just giving them a raise. Giving them training opportunities and education opportunities to bring them together as a whole, as a team, as a cross-departmental team.
Mhm.
Those are cheap. Those are easy, right? So use the resources. I mean, at ZOLL, we have tons of resources available to assist as training aids and training crew, dispatchers, billers, all of the above, right?
Right.
Bring them together as a team and offer that and invest in those individuals. It'll pay off dividends because they know that you care about them. They know that you want them to do well and succeed because that's going to make your bottom line succeed. And that's the goal.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Chuck, let me go ahead and ask you, because you used the term ecosystem, and I really like that because it's everything in the same, right? It grows together. But when we think about how to address the increased complexity in reporting standards, I mean, how can software help with this compliance? I mean, we think about NEMSIS data and we think about all these things that we've got to think about. How does this come into play?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the data and, from a management standpoint, and even as a clinical manager standpoint, you look at this, it's a world of a difference. We all know NEMSIS was really put there to, have apples, to compare apples and apples to make the data reporting similar. However, what it's done is it's actually created a lot more conflicts within the data that we were already collecting and stuff like that. So obviously building in NEMSIS, training with that, and training with your software application, when we really want to look at the operational clinical guidelines or KPIs, we really push for KPIs. I always say there's two revenues. You have your operational ones. What is our response time? What's our shoot time? What's our wheels turning time? That's nice because we got to be in compliant with some of our contracts and stuff like that. Your crews need to know what they're doing, who our lazy ones are. I always say 80% of your staff is going to do what they're supposed to do. 10% is going to try to rewrite the whole program and rewrite, everything about your company. And then they have this 10% that needs to be, lifted up constantly. Hey, come on, let's go. And then you start looking at your clinical decision making. Are we giving 12 leads for chest pains within 10 minutes of having patient contact? Are we getting them into the the PCI suite within a matter of time? Are we getting strokes into CAT scan? So along with our ZOLL Care Exchange, which is the HL7 integration with the hospital system, we're getting a lot of that outcome data back, so we can actually say, hey, listen, you had so many STEMIs, so many that went right to PCI, so many had had to be transferred to another center. Like, we're getting all that data. You're actually getting data that you can use to educate your staff to actually improve patient care and patient outcomes. Getting them into the right facility, the right decisions being made, the right care is being done. Our protocols are within guidelines that can be made.
Right.
Sometimes we put some parameters in place that sometimes are hard to be met in the field. I've been a practicing paramedic for 35 years now. Every once in a while, like, oh, there's new equipment, this new thing, this new medication, it's great, but how does it work into the workflow? And when I think of the ecosystem, the ecosystem has that point A through point Z all the way through. And as long as all the parts are in there, everybody's operating the way it's supposed to, it makes everybody happy, it makes everything seamless, everything, comprehensive, and you really get that the continuity of all the data, but you also have a source of truth. What is true about your data? Your mileage, is it GPS? Is it odometer? Is it MapQuest? A lot of that stuff could all be pulled together and make everybody's life a lot easier and a lot better.
Agreed. Jason, I think one of the things to even think about here when we talk about this from a standpoint is usually we just think about our care in the home, right? Or our care in the back of the ambulance. But Chuck brings up a good point now when we start to think about KPIs or we start to think about door to balloon time. This not only makes the EMS system look good, but really this is to the benefit of the patient that we're trying to serve as well.
Right. I mean, and you have to think about it this way, is that carries through not only in the pre-hospital world, but that carries all the way through to the individual departments in the facilities. So having the data available that ZOLL Care Exchange provides, it really plugs back into the facilities accreditations and what their capabilities are. So the data not only helps the end users to retrospectively look and say, oh yeah, Mrs. Jones had an MI and she was presenting such and such a way. Now we know, oh, okay, Mrs. Jones had an inferior MI and I treated it with X, Y, and Z. It really paints that full picture for the crew members to look back and say, oh, my treatment was spot on, but I thought it could be this, it could be this, but based on the presentation, it wasn't in fact an inferior MI, whatever the case is, it allows them to solidify what they think
Right.
with what the actual facts were.
Yeah.
And that develops our ability to think critically and takes it to the next level.
Exactly. Don't just tell me, show me, right?
Yes.
So it gives us the showing. We have so much more to get to, but I do just want to go take a quick break and talk about ZOLL Data Systems. This cloud-based solution suite of EMS and fire solutions covers the scope of your operation, from dispatch to patient care to incident and operational reporting to billing. Learn more about the ZOLL software and services at zolldata.com. And, I got to tell you, I mean, we're not just talking about a tool here, Rhea, but we're talking about ways that we can really develop the opportunities to deliver the highest quality of patient care and really to kind of take things, to the next level with reporting, with data, and so on. But really what this comes down to, and Jason, maybe I'll point this question to you, is it really comes down to the money that we get reimbursed, right? I mean, what people don't understand is we may send a $1,500 ambulance bill out the door. We're only going to get 400 and some odd dollars in reimbursement. And we kind of disconnect that from the field. So they got to understand that. But what we have to do is we've got to figure out ways to improve our reimbursement by creating rules for quality documentation to make sure that it's clean. We have a clean claim rate. We could capture more revenue. So really, it does come down to the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. What's the best way to do that?
It absolutely does, Chris. And the thing to remember is the software can do most of the work for you. So building out what we call data validation, the rules around what is documented for each of the different situations or scenarios that our crews encounter, having the data rules in place to guide them and drive them through what we need in order to effectively bill and get our highest first pass billing as possible, we can build out in the system. So pre-billing QA/QI, absolutely imperative. Having rules built into the chart to say, you have to have demographic information. You have to have signatures captured. Using EMS charts now to electronically capture those signatures. We're not waiting on forms to be shuffled from one base site to another. Get it all in there. I think about it this way. If I have effective QA/QI in my system through data validation, if I'm using what we call special reports to notify the billing department ahead of time, if I'm missing any of that data, right? When I get my chart entered, let's say I have a layover at the hospital because there's no beds available. If I'm using the system as effectively as possible, I can have my chart. If I have a 20-minute wait for a bed, I can have my chart done, my electronic signatures captured. I can have my EKGs imported automatically into the chart, and I can have my chart locked as soon as I walk out that door. It's already in billing if I have effective rules and validations built into the system.
Yeah.
And that can be as far as having fields completed or not completed, or specifically identifying what should or shouldn't be in those specific fields based on situation or scenario.
Yeah. I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, I just want to even get to a different point. And Chuck, I mean, 30 some odd years in EMS, 40 something years from EMS for me. When you have this tool, let's just even talk about the legality of having to go to court, right? I mean, so you now have a smart chart that's allowing you to put the data in that needs to be put in. So when you get put on that stand, you can rely on what you have as a source of truth for getting through that horrible time we're going to have in court.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I always stress there, all of my staff and constantly all of our customers, yes, it has to be done because it's a requirement by, regulatory agencies throughout all 50 states, that it's needed as the medical record, it's needed as the billing piece, it's needed as, that legal piece that you're going to go back. But utilizing the program the way it's designed and listening to best practices, we all know, us that have been around for a while have probably been deposed or maybe even have gone to court. And I'll tell you, for the younger generations that are joining EMS and coming in now, they just don't understand the importance of this until they are deposed. And a lot of times they might not even get there, so they're not afraid. But you only have to be deposed one time. And if you can't answer a question, or if you give somebody that I think, you just open up that attorney to go after you, and they are going to go after you aggressively. I've done some professional testimony also, and it's just one of those things. We always say if it's not documented, it wasn't done. That's true, but the documentation is also there to say, what happened? What was the scene like? What was the patient? How did the patient present? I come from a busy system, so I could do 18 calls in 12 hours. I'm doing a call documentation from 3 calls ago, so I'm trying to remember everything that I need to put just the bare bone minimum. But then when you think of it from a legal standpoint, like I have to justify this or remember this call in 5 years from now, you might not remember the car, the color of the car, something like that, but you can put some very distinctive descriptors in there, like for scene description, what did the scene look like? What did your HPI, versus your clinical care. Those are things that you really want to make sure you focus in. I always say before you complete a chart and say the chart's finished, first off, would it look good on the front page of a paper with your name saying this is what you did? And then does it show that you provided good clinical competent care? I don't care that you just did ABC, but did it show that you did it with compassion, that you did it with care, you did it with quality, and you did it as a patient advocate? Because if we're not a patient advocate, then that's the foundation of what we do. So the documentation of that piece for legal is just as critical as billing or clinical compliance.
Right.
A lot of people downplay it because they are lucky and they don't get called into court or get deposed.
I think you could have the best written chart in the world, and if it goes up on that stand, a good lawyer is going to make it look like the worst written chart in the world, and you are going to want to just run away with your tail between your legs.
And having been there, I'm like, oh my God, where you're coming with these questions, and
Yeah.
it's, don't you think that I don't even want to talk about it. I just got chills. So stop it, Jason. I just thought, but Chuck, one of the things that I was thinking of when you were responding to that was, I think that reimbursement is really something that all EMS agencies have to focus on, because we may need that money right away. And when we start to think about how to get faster reimbursement, when we start to think about how to have more predictable cash flow, I mean, you got to think that the ePCR and data flows are going to help with getting faster reimbursements, no?
Yeah, you would hope. The goal is yes. The goal is, I've seen it happen 2 ways. I see people bogged down with a lot of processes that were so early 2000s, and they haven't changed as software has changed. Like stuff that's coming out of the ePCR going over to ZOLL billing. There's another tool called AR Boost that will go out and search and verify the social security number, the date of birth of the patient, and any insurance coverage that they have, like Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Crosses, and stuff like that. So all that stuff, when you think of your pre-billing stuff, that's already done. So by the time it gets to the biller, it's there. Sometimes I've seen processes where it takes a week to get a bill out the door. I'm like, yeah, you got to get faster, because if it's taking you that long, then what else are you guys doing on the back end? Software is great. Software will do it. It's all about your processes and what you do internally with things. But we also seen it to a point where, as soon as that patient was transferred, the crew finished the chart, boom, they went over to billing, and that patient got a bill. They weren't even out of the ER yet, so like, oh, hold on a second. Software does do its job, so we need to make sure, the processes and the workflow are something that we would all agree on. Not getting that insurance at the time of service, not getting, we hate social security numbers, but healthcare is the only industry that still hasn't gone away from using social security numbers. So we ask those patients that. But if you don't get that, then the billing office has to go find it, and so giving the tools within the software to help them, that would definitely improve cash flow. And again, it definitely goes back to the process. Let's get the bill out the door as fast as possible. But remember, we're patient advocates. So let's make sure the patient gets the care that they need first, and then we can get the bill so we can continue to grow our business,
Yeah. And Jason, it's making sure you get the bills out the door fast, but making sure that the charting is right to get the bills out the door fast.
Exactly. And going back to one thing that Chuck had said, about the SOC. If there's data missing, you can use the software to be ahead of the ball game, right? You can use the software to say, okay, if this data point's missing, tell me why. Because if the biller knows ahead of time why something's missing, they don't have to go back and start from the beginning. They can start from that point and move forward, whether it's just calling the hospital or calling the patient's family or, doing some follow-up within just the crew. They can probably figure out the why, and get that detailed information a lot quicker. And that's really part of the battle, is staying one step ahead of everybody else, in terms of the chart completion and quality of the chart.
Yeah, I think that makes like good sense. We've covered a lot of stuff, man. We've talked about reimbursement. We've talked about compliance. We've talked about staffing, recruiting, and retention. These are all things that give EMS leaders headaches. And certainly, I think we've talked about it also gives folks in the field a little bit of trepidation as well. So you guys are experienced in this field. You're experienced as providers. And I really want to get your final thoughts now as we kind of now think about putting a bow on this show. So Chuck, maybe I'll start with you. When we start to think about a final thought in having the opportunities to handle this headache, I mean, what's the Motrin? What's the Tylenol for all these things that we start to think about of how we're trying to be as do the best job that we can, both outside with our members, with our patients, and then inside with all our bills and charting and compliance that we have to handle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very complex question. I think there's a lot of pieces that go into that. I would think, some of the things that we think of is, I go back to the ecosystem. If you have a system that you have evidence that from point A to point Z works, and it needs to be massaged every once in a while, double checked every once in a while, but it gives you that stream of workflow. The other thing is buy-in. I think you need to be involved with your community. You need to be involved with your communication center if you don't own it yourself. Like I know for us, we go through a county dispatch coordinated communication system. So, but we have monthly meetings. We talk about the different things. Talk about your crews. Have them sit at the table. Have them see some of these things that they do. The better they have the buy-in, the more they're going to support it. And the more they support it, the better they interact with it. And as long as we have, our dispatchers, our EMTs and paramedics, and our billing staff all working towards the same goal, knowing that we're patient advocates, rendering the best patient care in the quickest amount of time, getting them to the destination that they need to get to. And as long as we continue to improve the system, I always talk about the system improvements and stuff like that. We know volunteers are declining across the country everywhere. We know fire departments, municipalities are picking up other fire departments and are doing EMS now that they didn't. If everybody's at the table and they all have buy-in, again, go back to the patient and go back to sustainability of a system. Sustainability of a system is the delivery, the resources, and the money. If you have one of those three that don't or that are not there, you're going to have a difficult time running your system. So those are the headaches that keep all of us up at night.
Yep.
However, there are solutions that are available that can reduce that stress, reduce that, ability, make you more compliant
Yep.
and more rich with data.
Agreed. So I think Chuck just made your final thought, Jason, a little bit harder because I mean he really put a bow and icing on that cake. But what
He
do you give
did.
our listeners for a final thought?
He did, but I 100% agree with what Chuck said. And I think the biggest conundrum of all that is, where do you start, right? Because it's overwhelming to some. And doing something is better than doing nothing. So going back to what I said before, it's the little things that matter. Start small. If you start with one thing, getting crew members to effectively gather signatures, or getting some data validation built out, or getting a simple report that shows you factually what's going on with your organization, you can build from there. So start small and start building out to make a more comprehensive review of what you're doing, where you're at, and how to get where you need to be. We offer consulting services here, and it's kind of all encompassing of the operational aspect, the billing aspect, the reporting aspect, and really understanding the value of the data you have in your system is absolutely paramount. And so just starting small with that data, making that data accurate, and moving forward in a positive direction so that everybody's communicating effectively and everybody understands where you're at factually is probably the most important.
Well, I don't know how you did it, Jason, but you did it. So you guys came up with a great closing thought. But I want to thank you guys for joining us on the show. This is great, and promise you're going to come back, because I think that there is, so we could take any one of these things that we touched on like that and do a 30-minute show on it, right? We talk about staffing,
great.
compliance. So
Easily.
please come back and let us know when you're ready. We'd love to have you back. But you know, for everybody out there, I want to thank you for joining us on Inside EMS this week. And we really kind of learned a lot about the tools that are out there for us to do a better job. And sometimes we don't think about the tools, and we really have to pay attention to them. And I want to thank our guests, Jason Bartholomai and Chuck McSweeney from ZOLL Data Systems, you know, to take us through this, you know, this duck blind of tools that we need to have to do a better job. But if you have any questions, comments, and concerns, go ahead and email us at the show at ems1.com. And for Kelly Grayson, I'm Chris Saballero, and we'll catch everyone again next week.